Is everyone in here ready? It's really bright, so I can't see you if you're not. So here we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying till the bitter end and for your ethics credit. I will be your MC for this last panel. Ashley Myers. I'm a partner at the law firm of Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw Pittman. I'm based in our Austin office and practice environmental law there. As you all know, the legal profession is being asked to operate in a very different landscape than it was even a decade ago when I began practicing. And so we have a really fantastic panel with us today to talk us through the challenges that we're all facing in this profession in the 21st century. And I'm really excited to get to talk to each of them. They're practitioners and professors and really just really engaging with future generations of lawyers. So I'm really excited about what we're going to cover here today. So first, we're going to hear from Jeff Sivens. He's a senior counsel in the Austin office of Haynes Boone, and he's practiced all aspects of environmental law for over 50 years. So let that sink in, 50 years of practice. Now, Jeff is also a professor at the University of Texas School of Law. He teaches a seminar in environmental litigation, which is actually how we know each other. So he also brought me up as a lawyer. Again, over 10 years ago, but don't do that math. Next, we have Monica Urban. She is a professor of law at SMU Dedman School of Law, but she's also a professor in the School of Engineering, which I didn't know when we first met. And we haven't had the chance to work together or to engage with one another much, but what I've learned in our conversation is that she has this very innate ability to take complex subjects and break them down into a way that makes it easily digestible, which, as you all can appreciate, is a very particular and difficult skill in our profession. And finally, we have Nathan Block, who has been your host throughout this entire day and put this symposium on, and we're grateful to him for that. But he is BP's Managing Counsel for Litigation and Group Discovery Counsel. He also has over 26 years of experience practicing in environmental law, everything from litigation to remediation, regulatory compliance, and environmental due diligence. He's also a mediator and an adjunct professor at the University of Houston Law Center, where he teaches a class in negotiation theory and practice. Now, Nathan's also my go-to for consultant recommendations, my gnarly circle of questions, and the occasional glass of whiskey.
That's a good one.
Indeed. He has great recommendations if you need one. Now, when this panel was initially conceptualized, we had a fourth member, Trajan Perez from Miller Nash, who was supposed to be on the stage with us, and he graced one of our planning calls with his presence, but he's out there like being an actual legal professional, and if I understand correctly, he's in trial?
Next week.
So he's getting ready for trial, which is, better than traveling to Dallas. And so, some of our friends in the audience thought we should really just keep him here with us in spirit. And so they have prepared a Trajan for us, and he will sit on the stage with us throughout. Okay, so with that, Jeff, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy Earth Day. Tomorrow is my granddaughter Eden's 7th birthday, April 1st. Her sister turned 5. After 2 sons and 3 grandsons, it's a whole new adventure having granddaughters. When I saw the topic, I thought, molding, where have I heard that before? A number of years ago, you probably remember, 20 years ago, was it 10, 20? Mold was a hot issue, and everybody was trying to get on top of that and figure out how they could create a mold-related practice. And at the time, there were a lot of schools that ended up doing mold remediation, and one of them was Hill Elementary in Austin, and they were closed down, and when they reopened, they had green t-shirts for the students that said, Hill Elementary, molding tomorrow's leaders. And I thought, well, gee, that's another use of mold, and they both involve green, and that's what we're talking about today. So today, what I thought I would do was give you advice for young professionals based on my 50 years of experience. And what that really boils down to is developing basic skills, but being alert to and welcoming change. When I started 50 years ago, we had books. law books. And if you wanted to go out and practice on your own, one of your significant investments was a library. So that was an impediment. And when we shepherdized, we used books. We had hard-covered books and paperback books and then little leaflets that you'd look at to be sure that the case was current. And you were looking at rules, you had to check out the federal registers to be sure that the rules were still current. Drafting, we used dictaphones. The typewriters, they didn't even have corrected types. They had mag cards that just come in and you could put something on a letter and then you could change a few words and wow, that was magic. And you could do that with that machine. So you needed to learn how to draft differently than you did today. My mother was a secretary. She worked for a real estate firm, and she had to do a lot of typing. And when she had to do a correction, she had to pick up 4 or 5 carbons and erase each one separately. The world is a different place. When we had work to do overtime, we had to go back to the office because there was no remote working. Very different situation. And it was different also in that when you needed to respond to someone, they couldn't really track you down back in the day, right? You didn't have cell phones. So you didn't have to worry about one weekend you get a call and, hey, can you do this research for me? Very different than it is today where we carry our cell phones. And my wife says, why are you looking at your cell phone? I said, because I never know when someone's going to be in touch and need help right away. So very, very different things than we've got today. So we've come a long way. Research used to be books, Westlaw, key numbers, things like that, no more. So now we have the internet, we have AI, which is going to revolutionize the world. So I was trying to think, what is a good metaphor for what we're doing? Some of you may recall Super Conference 3 years ago. We did It's a Beach, and we started off with a video of Deborah Baker's son coming in on a surfboard holding a sign saying Texas Environmental Super Conference. That's a great metaphor for us because we need, I don't know how to surf, there's no way, but we need to, like a surfer, we need to master the basics. How do you get up on the board? How do you balance yourself? And how do you see and catch the next wave? And that's kind of the theme for us here today. So what I thought I would do is talk very briefly about the practice of environmental law, becoming a complete environmental lawyer, dealing with clients, dealing with other attorneys, negotiations, dealing with adjudicatory bodies. It almost sounds like an ethics presentation, doesn't it? We do a class on ethics, and we touch on each of these things. If you're going to be an environmental law practitioner, you need to be competent in that field. Well, what is environmental law? And here's a definition, and I won't read it. You all know what it is, but it relates to regulation of activities and conditions because of their effect or potential effect on human health and the environment, okay? That's really broad. What are the factual sources of environmental liabilities and responsibilities? I love charts and graphs, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But there are conditions, good things and bad things. There are bad things we need to protect against. There are good things we need to protect. And there are activities, and these things trigger liabilities and responsibilities. What are the legal sources of environmental liabilities and responsibilities? Well, environmental law started as kind of a common law practice, but it's evolved. It's now primarily statutory, but we have common law, contract, trespass, negligence, strict liability. We used to have nuisance as a cause of action. It's now a type of damage. And the statutes, there are a couple types, self-implementing and those that require rules. And then we have rules, but then the rules also provide for permits. And then if you violate the permits, or if there's an environmental threat, or if you violate a rule or violate a statute, then you could be subject to administrative orders and judicial orders, which themselves may have obligations and responsibilities. So what do we deal with? You all know this. Pollution programs, chemical handling, conservation, product waste regulation. And you know what these are. I'm not going to go through them, but I thought it would be useful because you can be an environmental lawyer. You could have two environmental lawyers, and they are doing two very different things and won't even speak the same language. If you're endangered species, you may not know anything about air pollution. If you're air pollution, you may not know anything about water pollution. You may. And there are lawyers who do nothing but CERCLA. There are chemical handling programs which deal with not waste, but things that come in. And then there are conservation programs, and we've talked about some like NEPA. What are the liabilities of concern? And this is for the lawyers: cost of compliance, cost of non-compliance, cost of investigation, remediation, damages to natural resources, damages to and diminution in value of real property. And then there are land use restrictions that we talked about earlier, stigma damages, and what we were just talking about, reputational damages, and that's a significant consideration for a lot of our clients. So that's kind of the base. So what do environmental lawyers do? We do, well, some do one of each, some do two of each, and some do three of each. We help clients comply with environmental requirements, and that's kind of what we started out with. We represent them in administrative and judicial proceedings involving environmental matters, and we help them manage environmental risks in deals. Okay, so here's the practical advice. How to become a complete environmental lawyer. Go deep and wide. What do I mean by that? My best example is one of my two mentors, Carol Dinkins. Carol started out, her focus was on coastal zone management. What in the world was that? I mean, where is that going to lead you, I thought. She became the go-to person on that topic when Governor Clements needed someone to help develop a coastal zone management plan. Carol was the person. Because of her high reputation in that area, she eventually became deputy counsel of the Department of Justice, responsible for environment and natural resources. And she became, I think she may have even become acting attorney general. She was acting assistant attorney general, and then she may have even been acting attorney general. And that started with her developing a narrow area of expertise. One of my other mentors, Don Howell, who had a public law section that we were part of, said, you need to go deep and you need to go wide. So, okay, deep in one area, but it's great to have perspective. The more things you know about, the better able you are to bring to bear your experience to a problem. So I was out of law school. I was out of school 5 years before I went to law school. I was a science teacher. I was a graduate student in organic chemistry. Those things, those experiences helped me in being a better lawyer. And knowing more things, I think, helps you in being a better lawyer. Write and speak. One of the lawyers in our office had written a law review at Yale on school finance litigation. Our firm was representing a bunch of school districts in that litigation in Texas. The partner in charge saw that this person had written the article. He asked him to be on the trial team. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, this young lawyer is now a partner. He is leading the second tranche of school finance litigation, and that was an article he wrote. So I tell my students, be deliberate in selecting the topic. Pick one that you think might be of interest. Who knows where it will lead you? And follow trends, as I said. I was talking with Walt Shelton, who was originally going to give this presentation. We were talking over lunch about bona fide prospective purchaser and all this stuff. And I got to thinking, this is going to be a really hot area. And I started focusing on transactional work in addition to the regulatory work and the litigation. And that is a huge area of our practice. Know the procedure as well as substance. The Administrative Procedure Act in Texas was enacted in 1975 when I started practicing. I wanted to be a litigator, but I thought I've got a science background. I really maybe should do environmental law. But then the APA came out, and we have contested case hearings for permits, for enforcement, in addition to litigation over rulemaking and commercial litigation involving contamination. And then, of course, Superfund came in 1980, and all of a sudden, a whole new world. But you need to know procedure as well as substance. I tell my students administrative law is critically important. Learn about other pertinent areas of law. Some of my favorite cases were bankruptcy cases. We represented ASARCO in their bankruptcy. We represented American Airlines and United Airlines bankruptcy, fighting over contamination at JFK Airport. Fascinating. So learn about other areas of law that may impact yours. Energy is obvious. Insurance is a whole new area. Well, not new, but it is a really active area. Oil and gas product regulation, EPR. Clarissa is back here. Clarissa Mills is one of my colleagues, had been deputy regional counsel, VPA. Yay, Clarissa. Clarissa and one of our young associates, Victor Salazar, are doing an EPR practice. That wasn't a thing several years ago, at least not as far as I knew. We knew about the green guides and this greenwashing and that type of thing, but this is a whole new dimension. Keep your eyes open for trends. Understand the pertinent science. I do have a leg up. I've got a couple chemistry degrees, and I taught science. My first teaching assignment was in the public junior high school in the South Bronx. It was a Title I school. I came in there after the first week, and they said, "We just lost our earth science teacher. Can you teach earth science?" I said, "Well, I've never taught earth science before. I've never even had a class in it." And they said, "Yeah, well, but you have a science degree, and that's better than the last person who was an English teacher." So I said, "Okay, great." So I got in my first week. I said, "Hey, I'm your new teacher. I'm going to be your earth science teacher." And they said, "That's what the other two teachers told us also." So anyway, but the science is useful, and you don't have to be a scientist to understand it. One of the best air quality lawyers I know is here. She is my navigator. We carpool together, Pam Giblin. That was a small attempt at humor, Pam. The other outstanding environmental lawyer I know was Jim Braddock, and I don't think Jim or Pam had a technical degree, and yet one of the most complex areas they mastered and understand the scientific concepts. I love diagrams. I love understanding the relationship of concepts. I think it's important. As an organic chemist, that's the way you would make things. You'd have to figure out what reaction would get you from point A to point B and know all the things in between and put them together stepwise. And so I thought I'd share some of my greatest hits of diagrams. So this is the energy sector. This is how all the pieces fit together. And by doing this, it helped me understand what the relationships were. And to me, that's invaluable. Because once I have that idea, then when I have a new fact, I know where to put it. The carbon cycle, a big issue. At this conference, we heard about carbon. And so I did some research on that, and one of the first presentations I gave on that quite a few years ago, I put together this diagram, and it's helpful to understand what relationships are. Superfund. This is a hierarchical, it's easy for me to say, this is an approach to defending Superfund. And you can kind of walk through it stepwise, and this is how you would put together a case. My favorite, Superfund defenses. How do they all relate to each other? They really do. And you could diagram it. And to me, this helps me understand and counsel my clients. How do you apportion liability? We talked about that and perhaps the use of AI. This was a chart that I put together, a diagram that I put together that helped me do that. Years ago, we represented the state of Texas. We sued Koch Industries for 300 oil spills in 6 different states. And each one of those oil spills was a separate cause of action. And we needed to figure out a way to organize. And I came up with this as a way of doing that. It's no longer pertinent because the definition of waters in the United States has changed once or twice since then. but it was a useful way to organize each and every spill. And then what about enforcement? I went through the act and did the same thing, and this also helped to keep concepts straight. How do things fit together? I think relationships are incredibly important. And this is an enforcement case under the Clean Water Act. This one I use with my students in class. Ashley, I don't know if you remember this one. Elements of an environmental toxic tort case. And again, it's helpful to understand what the elements are because you have to prove up every one of those if you want to recover. Conversely, if you want to defend a case, you can knock the legs out of any one of those elements and prevail. So the other thing I say is speak and write clearly and simply. Lessen the burden on your audience. Don't say latter and former, because when you say latter and former, then you make the reader go back and read, well, what did they mean? Don't say this without a noun after it, because this what? And then you have to go back and look at the sentence and what are they referring to? So make it easy on your reader or on your listener. Use roadmaps, tell a story. No excuse for not checking spelling and grammar. My grandson taught me that. There's something called Grammarly I wasn't familiar with. Become knowledgeable about AI and judicious in your use of it. You all know this. Hallucinations, don't be citing cases that don't exist. That's probably not a positive thing. But my older son is an IP litigator. My younger son works at the Department of Justice. I think they have constraints on what they can do with AI, but my older son was telling my younger son, you can write petitions, you could do discovery, you could write letters, and he was showing all these things, and my younger son, wow, that's really cool. And I use it also, not so much for legal research, but when I write something, they are really good at shortening it. I say, tighten it up, and they come up with great suggestions. But you shouldn't send anything out that's got poor spelling and grammar. Check your work, seek peer review. That's the great thing about being at Kelly Hart. We have a wonderful practice group. We share ideas, and that's a great way to make sure that your work product is everything that it should be. Know the code of ethics and your own moral code. Your own moral code may go beyond the code of ethics. I've got some of those issues right now where clients are wanting me to do things that are lawful to do, but they're inconsistent with the way I would approach it, and so we're trying to figure out how we find a middle ground. Be sensitive to ethical dilemmas. If you encounter one, don't try to power through it yourself. As someone was saying, Nathan, it might have been you, when you get involved in litigation, you really are gung-ho about your case, and you don't look up and around and see whether there may be some issues that you ought to confront. So go to a third party. If in doubt, seek out help. Be careful what you put in writing and to whom you send it. That's a problem with emails. It's happened to me. And okay, so network, observe others. It's a great way to figure out how to become the best lawyer you can be. Find mentors, be a mentor, get involved in the bar, and be there for your family. Dealing with clients, understand their business, understand your client contact, know how to talk with them, tell them options, and return calls. Dealing with other attorneys, be civil, keep your word. Negotiations, do research, be prepared to advocate, but a key point, find points of common ground. This is what this EarthX is all about. Find points of common ground and then narrow the points of dispute and try to identify those. Dealing with adjudicatory bodies, be truthful, be realistic, be zealous but respectful. Again, speak and write clearly and simply. Anyway, I wrote a blog on 50 years. How about that mustache? My wife is happy it's gone. But then again, so is my hair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Monica?
Hi, can everyone hear me all right? Okay, great. Ashley, thank you so much for all your work with this panel. Nathan, for your leadership with this symposium, to the State Bar section, to EarthX. I'm very appreciative of being here and look forward to just continuing this discussion about legal challenges in the 21st century. Jeff, you're a phenomenal professor and attorney. I was taking mental notes about what I'm going to remind my 1L students when I do their final exam review. Just you're such a good font of wisdom. So I appreciate those words. I have an approach, and I'll give you an introduction first. My name is Monica Ehrman. I am at SMU, Dedman School of Law. I'm a professor of law. As Ashley mentioned, I have a courtesy appointment at the Lyles School of Engineering at SMU in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. My background is primarily in oil and gas and energy. I'm a petroleum engineer from Canada, and I worked in the upstream, midstream, pipeline, trading, went to law school at SMU, grad school at Yale, and wrote primarily and researched primarily in the areas of energy law, oil and gas law. I've written in environmental policy and natural resource law. And what I've started doing and what is pertinent last year when I spoke at this phenomenal symposium, and what I continue to think about now is in the context of working with people. And so my grant-sponsored research, I have 2 grants from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. I'm grateful to Sloan, is centers on energy transition and just transition for Native American tribes, so tribal nations, working with tribal nations who are primary producers of oil and gas, and then how to assist them, what information do they need as they consider energy transition so they make it on their own terms. And I've been thinking about that. I have another grant application in process to work with carbon capture sequestration communities in the Gulf, in the South Gulf Coast. So in thinking about this work that I do, which is for people, and in thinking about my background, which is primarily now as an academician and professor in the academy, but I also came from practice. So I was at a law firm. I was with Locke Lord in energy litigation. I worked in-house for Pioneer Natural Resources and did litigation transactions. For those of you in-house, anything that comes up. And I've served on a number of nonprofit boards. So in thinking about what do I want my law students, your future colleagues, our sort of future champions for this world of sustainability and change, what do I want them to know, and what am I concerned about, and what do I think about a lot? I'm going to sort of take this temporally, and I'm going to start at the beginning of the academic semester. So I'll tell you what was happening maybe 2 years ago at the start of the semester. It was a normal day where you think about your syllabus. I teach survey oil and gas law. I've taught remedies, water law. I teach natural resources law, a land use seminar, and I teach 1L property. So 2 years ago, we are mostly in a very sort of traditional flight path for law school. We are at the sort of beginning of AI as it sort of pertains, or as it becomes more and more prevalent in our daily lives, but it's still kind of the beginning. We are still having most of our conversations about post-COVID and the impact of post-COVID on this new generation of scholars. And so in the academy, what we're thinking about at the undergraduate level and then at the graduate level is that these students who were faced with a very challenging time in their lives, the sort of the COVID experience, the removal from society, all of these impacts, how has that led to any kind of stumbling blocks or challenges in how they learn? And then how can we as teachers, whether you're K through 12, whether you're graduate or undergraduate educators, how then do we help these students survive? And then more than survive, how do we help them thrive? So those were the conversations we were still having maybe 2 to 3 years ago. Now, in this year, I have been thinking about how do I empower my students with skills such that they don't become obsolete in a legal future. And for me, the shift, the paradigm shift in thinking about first a sort of, normal to a post-COVID world to now an AI world, the speed in which this has happened is really, really mind-boggling. So what does that mean in terms of what you should be thinking about for your mentorship of young students or colleagues? And mine from teaching is I'm thinking about three things: adaptation, resilience, and leadership. And those are all environmental lessons that we apply to the world around us, that we as environmentalists, as advocates, as sort of community uplifters, these are lessons that are kind of ingrained. In a lot of conversations, it is not an easy, it's not an easy world to be part of, where you are always challenged and then looking for solutions, looking for a way to come together through sort of dynamic shifting political administrations, through differing environments, different legislative and regulatory spaces. But that's part of why we love this work. It is challenging. We are curious. We're problem solvers. And so that's one of the lessons I think about in teaching law students or teaching even young students, is you have to be adaptive. You have to change with the environment around you. So in my community, my sort of community-sponsored work, I was looking for environmental justice communities. Who could I help either at the city, local level in terms of maybe energy poverty, or in terms of maybe access to contracts, benefits, community benefit agreements in the Gulf Coast with respect to carbon capture, sequestration, and then of course thinking about my work in tribal nations. How do I empower tribes as sovereign nations so that they are imbued with the ability to have control and decision-making over their resources? How do we become supportive? Okay, grant world changes with the administration, so I have to rethink my messaging. How do I, with the same mission, with maybe less support at some levels and maybe looking for more collaboration at other levels, how am I able to still advance the mission? And so for law students, for any of your students, right, young colleagues, that's really what it is thinking about. It is always thinking about being adaptive. The other thing that I think about a lot is resilience, is you have to keep coming back and showing up with passion. And that is hard. And I think of it a lot as it does not have to have a continuous series of points along a line graph that are always up, with each one successively positive, that the trend just needs to be upward. That you can have sort of moments where you are frustrated, and then you surmount those with periods where you are celebratory, where you can persevere. And in thinking about that, I started in energy litigation and know that feeling where if you look at just, it's binary, I either win or lose, you've lost right away. That each motion, each discovery opportunity, that each hearing, everything, even thinking years ahead for appeal, or thinking about how do I just benefit the client and maybe stop all of this now, save money, save time, and decrease risk. So the idea then of resilience in this sort of age of AI and change becomes really critical. And I'll tell you some of these conversations then, back to our sort of time machine, in August. So I come from SMU. I lead the Energy, Environment, Natural Resource program. I would invite all of you to become involved with us. We hold our Energy, Environment, Natural Resource Colloquium next Friday, May the 1st at Perkins. I'd invite you all to attend. And in thinking about these conversations at the beginning of the academic year, we learned about what is happening nationally at the undergraduate and graduate levels. So students in this Generation Z, Gen Alpha, so they are not really familiar with a lot of things that are mile markers with how you, I, elder millennials, younger millennials, they have a very different perspective. So some of what is common or that you may hear is lifestyle. So lifestyle is important. And in sort of thinking about lifestyle and lawyering, those two don't always mesh. Sometimes they do. But that has been a challenge at the graduate level because we are not just graduate school educators, we're a professional school. And they have to come out and be able to work for Jeff and for Ashley and representing Nathan and working with you all. And it is still a client-driven business. And so that has been a tension, a conversation that we have had at the graduate school level. Our students are outstanding at SMU. But it is just part of this sort of generation where they have been through the Great Recession. They're mile markers about, can I afford a house? The economics of living independently, the ability to maybe get married, maybe own, like home ownership. These are not the traditional mile markers for this generation, which very much has been through sort of risk, financial and turmoil, through COVID, and through a lot of other volatilities in their life. And now AI. So some of the frequent conversations that I've had with high school students, I do career sort of coaching, like college counseling for first-gen students. What the conversations I've had with them and undergraduate and graduate level is, how are they going to compete with AI? Is AI going to take their jobs? And so they are thinking about the trades, going back to trade school. And in thinking about the integration and the importance of technology and trade in environment, in climate change, in energy transition, those all go together. There is no opportunity to build out any kind of infrastructure related to just transition or to any of these technologies that advance sort of the mitigation of climate risks or transition without technology, and more importantly, the people that know how to do the building. Especially as in this administration, we've had a focus on the sort of America and the made in America, the sort of supply chain dynamics. But more importantly, as we saw post-COVID, these disruptions in supply chain have impacts on commercial risk. So these are all things, if we can train the trades, then we cannot send a large language model out now to actually install a solar panel installation, or to do any kind of measurement, or to convene a town hall and have a sort of human contact with a community. So in thinking about how do we make ourselves resilient and adaptive in this sort of age of volatility and uncertainty, in thinking about how do we get our hands back in the soil. You know, a lot of us in environment, in energy, in oil and gas, and property, we call ourselves dirt lawyers. And I really love this idea that we are like holding the earth in our hands, you know, filled with microbiome and life and sustenance and nutrients. And in thinking about this return then, this return of attorneys to kind of embrace what it is we do, the earth, the environment, the air, the wind, a lot of that then allows us to reconnect with the physical spaces that we have kind of moved away from. So in getting students to understand the importance of client and human connection, while we appreciate these gatherings a lot more, while I think Zoom is perfectly fine for a lot of meetings, I love seeing you guys here today and just bumping into people. Jane Jacobs, in thinking about urban planning, always said that winding streets of New York were so much more important than straight linear paths because of the serendipitous opportunity to connect with people. And those exchanges increased happiness. And I love thinking about that because that's really what we do. So for our law students and thinking about these challenges with AI, I have taught them and I have introduced it in survey oil and gas law. They had to do contract drafting. They had to draft an amendment to an oil and gas lease. They had an environmental issue spotter where they had to represent the landowner and draft an original petition with environmental claims. And Jeff had talked about all of our torts. So they had to do that. They also had to draft a purchase and sale agreement and an amendment to a joint operating agreement. As part of that exercise, they were allowed to use an AI tool, but they had to explain the script, the prompting. How did they teach the model? And then they had to do a comparison. What was the takeaway between the sort of human-generated transaction and the negotiated contract versus the thing that the model spit out? And we looked at some of the AI-drafted contracts, which are going to improve at a sort of exponential Moore's law speed. These models are just going to get better and better and better. So the idea then of you need to not only remember that you need to stay on top of technology, as Jeff's word of wisdom reminded us, but you have to remember that you are not the tool, right? That we are not the fire, the wheel, that we are the people that use those things and they better humanity for them. And so keeping that in mind about AI, that it is like fire. So it can be used to better, or if left out of control without confines, constraints, it can cause great harm. The other thing in thinking about students is about leadership. So we talked about adaptation, we talked about resilience, and we've talked about leadership. And teaching this generation to lead is one of the things in academia that has been, I've had to put a lot of thought into it. This is a generation where you primarily work for baby boomers. And with baby boomers, remember working for the greatest generation, people who gave and gave. My husband's family is a fourth generation farm family, and his grandfather lived through the Great Depression on the farm, and they still tell the family stories about how locusts, grasshoppers, just ate everything. There wasn't a blade of grain left. They would eat the wood on the barns. How dust was just perpetual, this constant dust. And that same story down from Saskatchewan, Alberta, all through the Great Plains, we have those stories here in Texas, Oklahoma, everywhere. And it impacted that generation. So my husband's grandfather never trusted banks, right? They had lost everything in the sort of 1929 stock market collapse. And then 10 years without rain and drought, a real climate emergency. And how that shaped their ethic. And they were veterans of wars. They had given to greater good. And now imagine this next generation, right? Baby boomers that come after them, that work for people with that ethos. And now for those baby boomers, this was my generation, Gen X, that came, and I worked for phenomenal lawyers, mentors who taught me what it meant, that I never billed for a client on an airplane or travel unless I was working. And those things that I've held very dear to myself, those sort of values about how to be a good attorney, how to be an attorney's attorney. And then now with this generation, with the elder millennials, and now the younger millennials, and now these sort of Gen Z, born 2009, 2011, the sort of Taylor Swift era, and now this Gen Alpha, which is born after 2014. So the idea that we have the same historical points, the same things that connected us, we don't. We have these sort of dislocations. And it's just a reminder about how to reconnect with them. So in thinking about the leadership then, they still want to be challenged. They still want to do good. That is the beauty of this new generation coming. They want to make real change. And where better to make real change than in the world of environment, climate, and energy transition. This is our world, right? It is a world of making good change for everyone. The thing, though, about how you work with this generation is that you need to challenge them, but then you need to affirm their successes. So it's pull a little bit on the rope, stop and say, you're doing great. Pull a little bit on the rope and then say, still doing great. And you pull a little bit, but they need that constant affirmation. And that is not something that I am certainly used to doing. It was just, you're dropped down and you just better just do the work, figure it out. That's what being independent was. That's what having your own sort of motivation and leadership. And not true with this generation. And that doesn't make them any less, it doesn't make them any less useful or effective or brilliant as lawyers. It is a different way that we need to learn how to teach. And so the onus is not on the young. It's not only on the young. They are young. We were all taught. Sometimes it's reflecting back on what we as teachers need to do to help this generation grow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. Nathan, those are some tough acts to follow. Literal legal legend and then Monica's eloquence. Man.
Yeah, serious mental note. Never follow Jeff and Monica. This was good. Okay, so I'm going to take all of that, and all of those wonderful ideas will be some to varying degrees inherent what I'm going to talk about, which is I'm going to talk about this concept of wisdom and why we need more wisdom in decision making for things to do with climate, the energy transition, and other very challenging problems. So you heard my bio, but I want to give it a little additional context, right? I'm in my 27th year of practicing environmental law. 15 years ago, now 16 years ago, I worked on the Deepwater Horizon spill response and the accident investigation and got deeply fascinated with how decisions get made and with the psychology of decision making and then the discipline of behavioral economics. 10 years ago, I couldn't read enough, so I went and did the Strategic Decision and Risk Management program at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and the least the least mathy person you've ever met. I had to do decision analysis and barely scraped through, but I really wanted to try to understand decision making at a much deeper level. I've spent 5 years as the chair of this symposium. I've spent now 9 years teaching negotiation to law students. And it's from that perspective that I've got a few observations. One, short-term, narrow perspectives aren't just prevalent, they dominate our thinking, and they are incredibly difficult to overcome. Two, the strategies that we tend to use for decision-making are not only not necessarily helpful, they can actually be disadvantageous and hurtful to the process of making decisions for things that are really complex, like climate and energy transition. Third, there's a school of thought called rational choice theory. Right? If you saw Peter's presentation earlier this morning, you saw him put up some decision trees and talk about how he used decision trees to inform decisions. Decision trees come directly from the rational choice theory school of thinking about decision making. Rational choice theory, although it predominates decision making ethos in education now, isn't enough. It's helpful in climate, but it is designed around promoting economic rationality. And economic rationality is not always well aligned with what we need to make decisions around generational problems, right? I talked about that earlier. If you've been at other EarthX stuff, you've heard a lot of people make comments about, it's taken many, many generations to create this problem. And even if we bend the needle to net zero by 2050, it's 50 to 100 generations before this problem is completely fixed, right? So if you, I think it's an Italian proverb, the idea about, the wise man plants trees he knows he will never sit under the shade of, right? This is this long-term thinking for the future, right? You don't make those kinds of decisions based on economic return on investment. There's something else that's driving that, right? The fourth one is, we need to inject something into the way that we are teaching and educating ourselves to help make us better at this. And the last is, there is really no simple solution. I'm going to suggest to you that concepts of wisdom coming out of an academic study of wisdom are the way to go. Why? Law, politics, science, technology, finance, human behavior. We teach these as if they are separate and distinct things. They're not. It's all one big soupy mess. And the idea of wisdom, particularly what's called practical wisdom, not a general esoteric version of wisdom, but wisdom designed around achieving certain things, certain goals or objectives. Practical wisdom is how I think we're going to manage this reality. All right, let me get off that slide. So here's the model that I'm going to talk about. But first I want to say what exactly is the wisdom that I'm talking about. Like I said, I don't really want to talk about a general esoteric definition of wisdom. I got 20, 30 minutes. There's nowhere near enough time for that, right? But when you look at the academic study of wisdom, the cultural studies of wisdom, these models, these thoughts, they converge around a few common ideas. One is intellectual humility, right? You have to acknowledge ambiguity, and you have to figure out how to get comfortable with the limitations of our own knowledge. Two, you need, to some degree, a clear-eyed and dispassionate view of the human predicament. You have to be willing to engage constructively with uncertainty. You have to have resilience and an ability to manage emotion, but you cannot make these decisions devoid of emotion. And last but not least, you have to have a pro-social orientation towards the common good. And that is where we really lose the economic rationality idea. The good news is there is an ever-growing body of academic research and writing that shows that these concepts can be supported and taught, and that our ability to make wise decisions can improve. So let's look at the model. The first one is intellectual humility. That's the first tenet. That's the first brick. There's an academician and a behavioral economist, a guy named Herbert Simon, who developed this concept of bounded rationality. Our ability to be rational, our ability to make good decisions is bounded by, one, the time that we have available to make that decision, two, the volume of information involved, and three, the processing power or cognitive ability that we have to deal with that. Right? All of our decision making is bounded. Why is that important? So I want to give you some stats. I got to read these because I can never commit these to memory. In the 1950s, medical knowledge was doubling at the rate of once every 50 years. By 1980, the volume of medical knowledge was doubling every 7 years. In 2010, it was every 3.5 years. And the last good estimate was 2023, it was doubling 2 times every year. So if you ever wonder why you go see specialists more and more and less general practitioners, it's because nobody can keep up, right? The idea of being a Leonardo da Vinci style polymath in 2026 is a very different game than it was in 1493. You can't do it. And we have to figure out how to get comfortable with that, and not just get comfortable with it, but to pull it into our approach to the world and decision making. The next piece on the model is critical thinking. So I wrote a paper on this. There are copies of it available back there for my shameless plug if anybody is interested. If you have trouble sleeping, it'll fix you right up. I could tell from the margin comments on the paper the students really didn't like the commentary about critical thinking and what's going on with this generation. But here's the reality. There are numerous studies. A meta-analysis of studies show that critical thinking skills amongst incoming law school students have been in steady decline since the 1970s. It's not a dramatic decline, but it's a steady decline. And there's no single cause, right? Is it 24-hour television? Is it social media? Is it computer screens? We really don't know, but we know we need critical thinking. Societies and democracies in particular do not function if we do not have strong bullshit filters. They really don't, right? And to do that, you have to be able to think critically, right? So starting in grade school, we really need to put greater emphasis on critical thinking. And then whatever it is with social media, right, we're starting to see the unraveling of all of the evidence about what we've done to our children with social media and screen time, right? Whatever that is, whatever it is that's causing this decline, we've got to find the answer and we've got to figure out how to reverse it. The next key concept is numeracy. The cliche, we heard it today, right? I went to law school because I couldn't do math. We have got to stop that. And we've got to encourage more lawyers who are better at managing numbers, and we've got to get better at it ourselves. I don't need a lawyer who can build a Monte Carlo model, but I need a lawyer who understands the mathematical concepts well enough to know when they need to go get someone who can build a Monte Carlo model, right? You've got to be able to engage with these concepts smartly, right? Why? Because, good Lord, there are gigantic numbers involved in the climate change problem and the energy transition. The last IPCC estimate was that to get to net zero by 2050, and this is now like a 7 or 8 year old estimate, was we were going to need $78 trillion by 2050. Let that rattle around in your head, right, about how many projects, about how much investment, and how badly does it go if that's not spent efficiently, right? It's a ginormous number with ginormous complexity, and we have to be more quantitative, right? We have to be able to do things like avoid basic statistical base rate errors, right? We're still arguing over, not all of us, but some of us, there's still an ongoing argument about whether or not vaccines cause autism, right? The whole argument started because some people didn't understand base rates, and the base rate fallacy led to a misunderstanding of the data, and that debate has been going on for 40 years when there never should have been a debate. Never. And more people have got to be able to get to the point of being able to recognize that without 30 or 40 years of public debate. The good news is this can be taught and made very accessible and surprisingly easy. The next one is foresight. I'm not going to say a lot about foresight other than to say you can get better at predicting the future. There are systems and structures that tell you how to do this. And you don't get exact bullseyes, but you can figure out trends far better than you might think you can. Futurist is a degree program at the University of Houston, and Futurist is now a job. It's amazing, right? We need to figure out how to pull this more into what we do as lawyers for our clients to help them figure out their long-term view, where things are going, and why they might want to invest in things where they won't ever receive the economic return on that investment. The next one is decision support. There is a huge body of work out there now on decision quality, on decision analysis, simple, easy, accessible systems to help us make better, more thoughtful, more rational decisions. I would argue not just in law school, but starting in undergraduate, right? There ought to be at least one course that requires people to understand basic decision quality models and the supports and the systems available to promote better decision making. Decision quality isn't directly tied to improved wisdom, not necessarily, but if you can't organize and frame a question properly, right? If you can't frame a question properly and have some sense of when you have enough information, if you can't figure out what your values and trade-offs are, all of the things that these decision support systems help you do, you can't make a wise decision. The next one is supported ethics. Jeff alluded to this, I think, a little bit. I think Monica also talked about ethics to a degree. Most of what we teach in law schools under the heading of ethics is really about how to comply with disciplinary rules. And that doesn't tell you a whole lot about your own moral code, about your view of what's right in the world and what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. But it also turns out that there are a lot of tools available under models and writing that can help people do this. There are books that will help you figure out what your own personal ethical code is and to define it. And it is a very healthy exercise. If you want to be able to guide clients in making decisions and not find yourself way down the road in supporting them in some action that you're not personally comfortable supporting, you really need to know what you believe in. And you can't do that at the last minute. There's a professor at USC, a fellow named Ali Abbas, who has written a book and a model called Ethical Decision Quality. And it is a simple, accessible, easy-to-use model to help you work through ethical decision making. It's not the only model out there. It's the one I happen to know best. Right? This sort of thing, also at the undergraduate level, certainly at law school levels, we don't have to teach it in detail, but we need our students to know these are available to them so that they can engage and use them. Let's see, where are we at? We're at about 8 o'clock on the model. Compassion, rational compassion, and dignity. One of the things I say frequently that draws a reaction from some people is we spend way too much time and effort promoting empathy. Stop it. There's a better way. Right? The problem with empathy is, particularly when we're dealing with concepts like climate change and the energy transition, right? When you empathize with someone, you feel as they feel. And you take that on board. And the problem with that is, to deal with climate, to deal with the energy transition, people are going to have to be displaced. Decisions are going to have to be made around the allocation of scarce resources, right? So there's a philosopher named Alan Bloom who has promoted a theory called rational compassion. And he illuminates very well why empathy will lead you to inaction, whereas rational compassion, having stepped back, you're not accounting for it, but you're not feeling as someone feels. It's a better model. Stop talking about empathy in this. I'm telling you now. In a conversation around climate, don't use the word empathy. Stop it. It's unhealthy. And it's also not good for your own mental health. The next bit there is dignity. We have to make sure that we account for people's essential need for dignity. And I think the discussion that Mark and Greg had around engaging communities and why it's so important to get there early and to build trust and to talk to people, to sit on porches and drink tea, at a very fundamental level, it's that you are acknowledging their dignity as human beings and you are engaging them with them. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with them. It doesn't mean they're going to agree with you. But if you don't acknowledge people's essential dignity, they're never going to agree with you, and they're far more likely to resist whatever it is that they're trying to be moved toward. And then the last concept I want to talk about is directly out of this academic field in wisdom called generativity. And the idea of generativity is you have to consider the impact of a decision on the future. Not the next quarter economic numbers, right? The future. And there are tools, there are tactics, there are ways that you can get people to do more looking at those, right? My favorite is simple, is to ask, hey, just because we can, does that mean that we should? I won't get on my AI soapbox, but I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the use of AI for most of the current use cases because we're not asking that question, right? The tools are there, they're being promoted. I'm not sure that just because we can, it means we should, because I don't think we've got enough really smart use cases where we're sure we're not going to damage that essential piece of the human in the loop, right? Their ability at judgment, their ability at discernment, their ability to make wise decisions, right? So some version of that forward-looking pro-social mindset is common to every single model of wisdom that you will find anywhere, and it is essential. And it bookends this, right? Start with intellectual humility, come all the way around the circle to generativity. And that concept of generativity needs to inform a lot more of our decision-making in every aspect, but particularly in these big, thorny, complex problems. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you, Nathan. So we're going to switch over to our Q&A portion of this session while we have another like 15 minutes, maybe 20 or so. But I'll get us kicked off, and then I'll join everyone out in the crowd in case you all have questions. And for my first question, I'm going to put on my Trajan hat, or my Trajan face, who is wearing a hat. When we were doing our prep session that Trajan joined, he made this observation that, in the age of AI, he's seeing that there's a growing importance of, being a counselor. So, being a human lawyer versus an AI lawyer. And I'm just curious to get each of your reactions to that sentiment.
Start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, I think that's what attorneys are. We're counselors, and AI, as Nathan indicated, it's a tool. It's a tool available to us to help us acquire the facts and evaluate the facts. But ultimately, the value added of an attorney is their opinion based on the facts and applicable, easy for me to say, law. And so, yeah, I think AI plays a role, but ultimately, we as counselors are the ones that our clients need to rely on. We have the insights into their business, their objectives, what the guardrails are for them, and we can assist them in realizing their objectives.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I've thought about this in two contexts. The first is maybe kind of a general firm-wide sort of context, and that's in our sort of thinking about who the department in a company, typically, or a firm, about what that department is called. It's resources. It's very extractive, right? When you think about human resources, it's like something out of the Matrix. And what is it? It's mostly just an interaction with law, regulation, to Nathan's point, how to comply with rules, right? Employee handbook policy. Okay. So the sort of futurist thinking about that is like human connectivity. And how do we then implement these human connections within firms, within companies, within systems to really ensure that human ideas and spirit continue to flourish?
I can't add a whole lot to that. I will just note that one of the things I have regretted over the course of my career is very early, I was given the opportunity to kind of make up my own business card, and I thought it was cool that it said attorney and counselor at law. And I stopped doing that, and I wish I hadn't, because I think it's an important reminder that that's really what we do, right? It's the judgment, it's the discernment, it's the ability to help guide that makes the profession a profession and not just a trade.
Yeah. Well said. So any questions from the audience? I'll bring the microphone over to you.
I think they're ready to get out of here.
Okay, but so before we do that, I've got one last question for each of you. And so maybe in one sentence, maybe each of you can address, to be a 21st century lawyer in the age of AI, what is the one thing that lawyers must get right? Big question for the end of the day.
I think it's curiosity. I think they have to continue to be curious. And I think the thing about engineers, scientists, lawyers, we are good question askers. And we have that sort of innate, trained sometimes, that idea of curiosity, because otherwise we just become passive users of it, and we have no ability to question how it works, or why it works, or should it work, or should we use it, or when to use it. So I would really push that curiosity become sort of a vital characteristic of a human AI interaction?
I don't think it's all that different, but mine is you've got to get, is what Jeff said, right? Deep and wide. To be a good lawyer in the 21st century, I think we have to get wider. You've got to get outside strictly the study of law into a lot of these other concepts.
Okay, Jeff, you get the last word.
Okay, I'd go to Dalbert, and I'd say, Dalbert, for reliability, you look at facts and methodology, right? So you need to gather the facts, and that's difficult these days. You need to try to be objective, and then your methodology needs to be impassioned, not unobjective, not swayed by passion, but taking into account the objectives of the client. So, yeah, I think the key thing is to be sure of the facts and then apply a rational methodology to come up with advice.
Very well said. All right, Jeff, Monica, Nathan, it was a pleasure to share the stage with you and Trajan's Face. Please join me in thanking our panelists for today.